So I know it's been a little bit since I've uploaded anything to my channel, and there is a good reason for that. I actually started a new position at my job, so a lot of my free time has been focused on training for that position. And while of course I would like to upload more consistently to this channel, I don't always get the opportunity to. I've been a little burnt out lately, but I do have a lot of content planned for the next 2 months or so. So I hope everybody can look forward to that. And I have a handful of videos that I do want to catch up on from December and January that I missed and want to still talk about. And this first one is probably one of my most anticipated TV shows of recent years. Dexter New Blood takes place 10 years after the original series Dexter ended, and sees Dexter, after faking his death, now living in a small upstate town in New York. He has renounced and controlled any urges to kill in this time because he wants to stay as under the radar as possible. However, when the self-centered and dangerously reckless son of a local business owner arrives on the scene, it tests Dexter's ability to keep his dark passenger restrained. Now, if you know me personally, you'll know that I am a big fan of the original series. The 4th season in particular is still one of my favorite seasons of television that I've ever seen, with the Trinity Killer. That, I think, was Dexter at its peak. I wasn't really satisfied with the original series ending, like I think a lot of people were. In the last couple seasons I felt like really dipped in the quality of the show. So when this limited series was announced and it was going to have Michael C. Hall come back as the character and give him a good proper ending, I was unabashedly very excited for this, because it's something that I feel like a lot of people have been hoping for a while, and they were finally actually realizing that. However, I do ultimately have mixed feelings about this series. I do think it's stronger than some of the weaker seasons of the original show, but it probably lands kind of in the average quality of what the other show was. And that's kind of because it falls into the same tropes as the show. Now, I loved the first episode of this show. There's a part of me that wishes that this revival was just a movie, and that was a good chunk of it. It's really interesting to see Dexter trying to be a decent citizen in a tightly knit community. There are fun winks and callbacks without it being entirely reliant on the nostalgia of the original series. Michael C. Hall is still probably the best part of the show. He brings such an interesting presence to this character, and he remains to be the most interesting person to watch on screen. And one creative decision that I was really a fan of was making Dexter's conscience now be Deb, his sister, played by Jennifer Carpenter, because I think she was one of the best parts of the original show, and I'm glad that they somehow found a way to still include her in this one. So I was really happy to see her replace his adopted father as his conscience, because it kind of makes sense. And I love the way the first episode played out. It slowly builds up this suspense of seeing Dexter kind of pushed to his breaking point again, where he will kill. And as soon as it does get to that point, probably the worst thing that can happen happens, and his estranged son Harrison shows up to confront him. And I'm a fan of the setup for this show. I think exploring the dynamic between Dexter and Harrison would be really, really interesting, and I think the show does a decent job at executing it, but there is quite a bit left to be desired. The biggest issue with the show is that it falls back into annoying habits of the original series. The show creates a handful of plot holes for itself that it never really takes time to address. It also drags out certain issues that aren't inherently interesting, really slowing down the pacing of the show. There's also an issue with the characters making bad decisions that feel out of character, to the point that said decisions feel incredibly forced by the writers. So those things felt really similar to the original series and the problems I had with the original series, but there were a handful of new elements in this show that I did really like. I thought the setting was refreshing. I like that it was in a smaller town and it's in this really cold environment, so it makes it feel a little bit more claustrophobic, a little bit more dangerous, and it feels like Dexter's actions have higher consequences, their stakes are higher because it'll be easier for him to be caught in this situation. The acting is also solid for the most part. Hall is once again great as Dexter, and the best new addition is probably Julia Jones as Chief Bishop. One aspect I did like about the show, that for the most part this police force is a lot more competent than the police force was in the original series, which is probably the most ridiculous part of that show, is that the police officers and the entire force had no idea what they were doing basically the entire time. Clancy Brown also plays the main villain serial killer of this season, and I do think that he does a really good job. I think he gives one of the better performances as any of the villains throughout the series, but I do wish that they would have incorporated his role in the plot to have a little bit more weight to it, because it wasn't really focused on him. It's more focused on the Dexter and Harrison dynamic, but I feel like he should have gotten a little bit more attention than he did for the show to work the way it should have. One of the biggest letdowns of the show is Harrison, which is mostly on the writers. There are moments where his involvement is interesting. Him tracking down Dexter and confronting him for abandoning him is interesting, but they never really take a deep dive into that or what exactly happened to him in that time. He ends up coming across as annoying a good chunk of the time. He is a teenager with a lot going on, granted, but they also drag out Dexter telling him why he had to leave him. So the show ends up feeling very much so like a serialized TV show, in that a simple plot point is being dragged out for all it's worth to kind of pad the runtime, which gets really annoying to watch. I also wasn't a huge fan of Jack Alcott as Harrison. He fits the part fine, but when the show calls for him to give a more emotional performance, he comes across as stiff and wooden, and that's really apparent in the finale, especially in kind of the climactic scene between him and Hall. There are some really good moments throughout this show. I'd say especially episodes 7 through 9 do a really good job of building up the suspense to a confrontation with Kurt. And then I really liked the first episode too. I do think episodes like 2 through 6 or so were still solid, but a little over long, to be honest. And I was satisfied with rating this show somewhere from like an 8.5 to a 9 at the time. And I did actually really enjoy where the finale was going until the last 10 minutes. The conclusion to the show was weird, contrived, and incredibly predictable. From stupid character decisions to extremely rushed and unfinished story points, the last 10 minutes of this show really soured its overall effect on me, and ultimately left me disappointed that the showrunners once again dropped the ball on giving Dexter a satisfying ending. I say that, but I did enjoy the show for the most part. I do think it fits into kind of the average quality of the original series, but I was hoping for a lot more. So I'm going to be rating Dexter New Blood a 7.0 out of 10. And now I actually want to get into some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show or don't want it spoiled, you can go ahead and leave the video if you want. But I feel like I kind of need to talk about the spoilers because it's why I'm so dissatisfied with the show overall. While I was hoping that this finale for this series was going to be a more final ending for Dexter, where he did die, I was not a fan of the way they did it. The finale starts with Bishop arresting Dexter after basically uncovering that he was the killer of Matt Caldwell. Then a good chunk of the episode is Dexter in custody, caught, being confronted with his crimes, which I loved. That's what I wanted to see from this show, is see Dexter get caught and confronted. And that's where I think that this episode especially really worked, because Dexter C. Hall's acting especially is phenomenal here. It's really interesting to see Dexter kind of try to figure out a way to squirm his way out of this situation, even though Bishop has basically figured out that he killed Matt Caldwell and he is the Bay Harbor Butcher. I liked what they were going for up until they had Dexter kill Logan to escape the police station. Now, Dexter has killed innocent people before, but here it felt stupid, mainly because when Dexter has killed people who probably didn't deserve it beforehand, it's been to cover his identity because they were either going to expose him or something like that was going to happen, or he used them to cover up his crimes and shift the blame, which makes a little bit more sense. In this situation, there's no possible way that he could be under any other alias because his face would be plastered everywhere and he'd be chased down for the rest of his life until he's caught. So it just felt like a stupid fucking move to make for the character, and it felt really out of character. And then of course him killing Logan is used as a plot device for Harrison to kill him, which felt really flimsy because they kind of work to a point where Harrison's starting to look at Dexter favorably. Dexter lets him know that he is basically a serial killer, and Harrison is okay with it for the most part. And it feels like it was just a switch that was flipped, and it was just this matter-of-fact thing that just happens here in a couple minutes. And Dexter's whole motivation for killing Logan is completely changed when he sees Harrison, and then Harrison's feelings towards his father is completely changed once he knows Logan is dead, which makes sense to some extent, but it's also so much content that's shoved into the last 10 minutes of the episode that it feels, like I said, incredibly contrived and stupid. Like I said before, the acting here is really all on Michael C. Hall, and Jack Alcott does not give a very good performance. It's pretty disappointing. And then after Harrison kills Dexter, Chief Bishop gets there and just lets Harrison go, even though it's been established that she does not like Harrison and thinks that he's potentially dangerous, which makes no sense why she would just let him go. But the worst part about all of this is that there is no resolution after that. It just ends with Harrison leaving. So there's no way to wrap up any of the other characters' storylines. They hint at having Angel come back into the show for a confrontation with Dexter. That does not happen, which would have been amazing to see happen, because I wanted to see Dexter get confronted with his crimes. I really wanted to see Dexter squirm. The whole thing with him trying to keep his identity as a serial killer secret is, of course, he doesn't want to be caught. I mean, of course he's going to keep his identity secret because he's a serial killer. And although he's an anti-hero by killing serial killers or whatever, he's also still a terrible person. So I would have wanted to see him get caught and have his identity exposed to the entire country or world or whatever as he is the Bay Harbor Butcher, and get to the point where he's stuck in custody and cannot escape it. And I feel like that's just what the show was originally building to, was him being exposed to everybody. Like, that's his worst fear. That's what should have happened to him, instead of him being able to get a quick out by getting killed by his son. This season spends a lot of time dragging out the rest of the plot, and then shoves so much into its final moments that it can't help but be compared to Game of Thrones, which I was defensive of course, when it first came out, but have no desire to rewatch since because it is disappointing to shove so much content there just to have it there. I was obviously disappointed with this show. I think that the last 10 minutes really ruined it, and I just think it was a stupid ending for Dexter. I'm disappointed that he is now dead, and it's mainly because he made really out-of-character decisions at the end there. So it's mostly an underwhelming feeling when it comes to this show. I probably won't rewatch it because of the last 10 minutes. But what did you guys ultimately think of Dexter New Blood? Were you as disappointed with it as I was, or were you into it? Where would you put it in a ranking of all the seasons? Let me know, and I'll be back with another video.